Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to our Sunday morning roundtable discussion on this beautiful Easter morning, and happy Easter to you all. We're so glad you could join us for our subject of reality. We are recording today from the Plainfield Christian Science Church, Independent, in Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. We welcome you all. We'll begin with our morning prayer.
This morning I'm reading from Miscellany, page 191, and Miscellaneous Writing, page 180. There's a lot of noise I hear. Okay. This glad Easter morning witnesses a risen Savior, a higher human sense of life and love, which wipes away all tears. With brave clothes laid aside, Christ's truth has come forth from the tomb of the past, clad in immortality. The stopwalkers give up their dead. Spirit is saying unto matter, I am not there. I am not within you. Behold, the place where they laid me, the human thought has risen. Mortality's thick gloom is pierced. The stone is rolled away. Death has lost its sting, and the grave its victory. Immortal courage fills the human breast and lights the living way of life. I love the Easter service. It speaks to me of life and not death. Let us do our work, then we shall have part in his resurrection. Mary Baker Eddy.
It's beautiful, thank you. All right, the watching point, Karen.
Watch number 313. Watch in tracing from the material counterfeit back to reality, lest you neglect the step that lies between. One cannot cross from one mountain peak to another without going down into the valley that lies between. If one peak stands for the counterfeit and one for reality, the valley may be called the opposite. For example, life, harmony, health, and love constitute reality. Their opposites are death, discord, sickness, and hate. Their counterfeits are human or physical life, material harmony, bodily health, and personal love. One cannot trace from personal love to divine love without exposing the fact that personal love as a counterfeit of divine love is based on hate, the opposite of divine love. The same argument holds good with every counterfeit with which we have to deal. This watching point will prevent a student from believing that he can go from the counterfeit directly to the reality without first analyzing the counterfeit in terms of its opposite. And I shall read from Miscellaneous Writings, page 351. This is under Fallibility of Human Concepts by Mrs. Eddy. Evil counterfeits good. It says, I am truth, though it is a lie. It says, I am love, but love is spiritual, and sensuous love is material. Wherefore it is hate instead of love. For the five senses give to mortals pain, sickness, sin, and death, pleasure that is false, life that leads unto death, joy that becomes sorrow. Love that is not the procurator of happiness declares itself the antipode of love, and love divine punishes the joys of this false sense of love, chastens its affection, purifies it, and turns it into the opposite channels.
Thank you. Well, I had more than one person ask me, what the heck? So, anyone like to comment on this?
Well, we do know that when we have problems that come up, whatever it's called, it's all about personal sense. Talking about itself, Mrs. Eddy, in the first edition, the precious volume, when I started reading it, I mean, it was on every page in the book practically. Lots of terms. She used it a lot, and so we have to impersonalize all these things. So it's very important to learn to do this. But you're right. I mean, there's, I had to read this a few times, but I know that it's very important in Christian Science to impersonalize all that God is. If we personalize it into a person, place, or thing, that's when we have problems.
Yeah. One time, Mrs. Evans asked someone in our church to count all the times personal sense was in the first edition. And Mrs. Eddy does say that's the culprit because that's what error can pin itself on. And a personal sense is a selfhood apart from God. But to me, I don't know, this watching point is saying what we say often here, that the human mind is a killer. And you've always got to trace what seems to be, it's not so bad, human or physical life, material harmony, bodily health, personal love, right? Oh, that's okay. That's all right. So, no, that's the counterfeit. But the opposite of the reality is death, discord, sickness, hate. So don't get tricked by the counterfeit seeming pleasantness. That's what it's saying.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The killer. It's a killer. So you cannot truly have human or physical life. You're going to die. Material harmony will kill you. Bodily health will kill you. And personal love will turn to hate. And you have to have that really clear in your thoughts so you're not
tricked.
Yeah, tricked.
And don't we just translate every good back to God and see that it's not material good, it's not human goodiness, it's, and if we find a problem with that, then we have to fix that.
Exactly, because there is no good except the good God bestows, right? Mm-hmm. So if you think something's good but not of God, well, sorry.
The counterfeit. Could I say something?
Sure.
The counterfeit is devious because it lets us become apathetic. We seem to think, it's not so bad. I'll work it out later. I can distract myself. And that's when we get in serious trouble because the personal sense begins to appear very comforting, and it's not. And that's where the jugular vein gets attacked, so to say.
Thank you.
I also had difficulties with this watching point when I first read it. Didn't know what it means, and I thought, do I need to go through all these opposites, death and sickness, to get to the other mountaintop, to the reality? Then I took a piece of paper and drew it. I drew two mountaintops and the valley in between and put the names on there: divine, life, harmony, health, and then the personal, counterfeit. And then in the valley, you have death and sickness and disharmony. And that made it more clear for me that you could, in the middle, you could have the mirror, which mirrors the personal understanding of all this, to the divine. And then you have the opposite and there's an opposite to both. But it says we need to analyze it. And that made it easier for me to understand it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this is a very important watching point for that reason. So you're not tricked by this counterfeit that would seem okay, but it's not. It will lead to sin, disease, and death.
So whatever helps you get there, to realize that the human is not the reality.
It was interesting, this lesson this week on reality, and basically what it is saying. Our spiritual sense can see what really is reality. And there, John at Patmos saw the New Jerusalem, and it is our spiritual sense that will enable us to see this. And I love Mrs. Eddy talks about the states and stages of consciousness, and that's what you see all around, or states and stages, because the same people will see the same thing and have a different viewpoint, and one will be terrible and the other will be beautiful. And the one who's seeing it beautifully will experience all good, and the one who's seeing it horribly, at least for the moment, and in the Adam dream, will seem to be experiencing something that's not good. And this is why we awaken ourselves and then work to awaken all others so they can see this beautiful New Jerusalem all around us right now. There was an interesting article that Carrie sent. Actually, I forget the name, but anyway, it was, it brought out about, I guess, spiritual Christian Scientist view. And one of the things it brought out was how did, in Noah's time, when they were trying to get rid of quote unquote evil, what did they do? Or what happened?
Was it the flood?
Yeah, the flood. Yeah, it was supposed to destroy all the evil. Did it?
No.
No, it did not. I mean, that's a major point to the story. It didn't work. It did not work. And that's why when we talk about this too, all these wars and all these things we think are going to conquer hate, and it doesn't, does it?
No.
It doesn't work. So, and it brings out too about the fire. People think, well, there's going to be a fire, they'll burn the world up and things like that. That's not going to work either. What's the only thing that will work?
Love. Turns out to God, love. It's love. Great love.
Yes. And we have to start with ourselves, and then, let it heal all mankind, and let it bring this New Jerusalem in. So important that we have the New Jerusalem. It's here. It's for us right here and right now. Mrs. Eddy says in the lesson, it's a what? What is it? The present possibility. A present possibility. And I know sometimes I do. I feel like I'm in heaven. I tell you to stay in your Father's house. That's what I mean. In his consciousness, seeing things correctly and having that deep, settled peace within you.
Then she said, if you are in one mind, you will be in the millennium.
Yes. She also said if all Christian Scientists would love each other, there'd be no need for a church. As we talked about, there'll be no need for government. There'll be no need for a lot of things. If we were living this truth.
Yes.
So, and the only way we can start is to do it within our own selves, right? Our own selves.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We can't go around forcing others or thinking we have to force others. So, Mrs. Eddy talks about how do we gain spiritual sense? They're the only real senses of man.
Honesty.
Yep.
Get yourself out of the way.
Well, the spiritual sense of truth must be gained before truth can be understood. This sense is assimilated only as we are, yes, honest, unselfish, loving, and meek. And then in the soil of an honest and good heart the seed must be sown, else it beareth not much fruit. For the swinish element in the human nature uproots it. And Jesus said, ye do err, not knowing the scriptures. So if you think you don't have much in the way of spiritual sense, we'll start by using those qualities: honesty, unselfishness, being loving, and meek. It must be developed, and the lesson also has the sower and the seed in it, because you have to have a receptivity for it, right? The good soil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you do this, and you develop your spiritual sense, you can bring the New Jerusalem right here and right now, which is the only answer to any of these problems. I mean, the government's not going to do it. The whole list of ways people have tried to do it, it's not going to do it.
Your human family's not going to do it.
Well, when I was thinking about the watching point this week, I was thinking about how, when you come here, to a certain degree, you feel you have to fake it until you make it. And then you realize you have to put down those mortal mind tools, and pick up the new ones. And until you do that, you're not really going to make a lot of progress. So.
Thank you. Yes. This is from David Keaston's book that he's working on right now, The Christ in Bible Prophecy. But I thought this was so beautiful. He writes this: in chapter 21 of Revelation, we see the Lamb's wife referred to as the heavenly Jerusalem, and the abundant description of the heavenly city, 12,000 furlongs on each side, and the height of the city is the same dimension. Imagine a heavenly city of 1,500 miles on each side, as well as 1,500 miles high. Wow. Mount Everest is only 5.5 miles high. The walls were 216 feet tall. In reading this description of the New Jerusalem, one can hardly wait to see it. It's a good thing to read it and think about it. It's hard to even imagine it. Then it says, this author has made a study of near-death experiences for over 40 years. Of the dozens of accounts of individuals who have seen this city and came back to tell of it, it is awe-inspiring to hear their testimony, as it is hard to describe in human language the beauty, divine harmony, and love that is felt there. And that is the essence of the New Jerusalem. What we see here on earth cannot compare to the celestial vision of the divinity of what God has planned for those who are faithful to his chosen witnesses. But we can come close, right, if John did it, and if it's a present possibility.
Yeah, but John did it by having his spiritual sense really developed.
Yes, very developed. Thank you.
He did not done it human will or anything like that.
No. He bowed before it all. And yes, what Karen read from the watching point, the fallibility of human concepts, it's a very important chapter to study. And there's another in No and Yes. And this, a few pages in No and Yes I was studying. And this speaks about the ark. Mrs. Eddy says, Adam's mistiness and Satan's reasoning ever since the flood, when specimens of every kind emerged from the ark, have run through the veins of all human philosophy. Human reason is a blind guide, a continued series of mortal hypotheses antagonistic to revelation and science. It is continually straying into forbidden bypaths of sensualism, contrary to the life and teachings of Jesus and Paul and the vision of the apocalypse. Human philosophy has 99 parts of error to the 100th part of truth, an unsafe decoction for the race. The science that Jesus demonstrated, whose views of truth Confucius and Plato but dimly discerned, science and health interprets. It was not a search after wisdom. It was wisdom. And it grasped in spiritual law the universe, all time, space, immortality, thought, extension. This science demonstrated the principle of all phenomena, identity, individuality, law, and showed man as reflecting God and the divine capacity. Human philosophy would dethrone perfection and substitute matter and evil for divine means and ends. It goes on. It's just incredible how she writes what she says. It's wonderful. So you can all spend time studying those things in prose works if you're not familiar with it. It's so enlightening. I was telling Gary, one of the things I loved about Easter when I was a child was they always had all these Easter stories on, like the greatest thing in the world and Ben-Hur and the Ten Commandments, these big productions, which I loved to watch them. And usually they were on the week before Easter. They were certainly on Good Friday and Saturday nights. Last night I was looking for something. They had the Clash of the Titans, which is Greek mythology. They had Harry Potter, and they had King Kong versus Godzilla. I don't know what it was like in your neck of the woods, but I was sorely disappointed. I couldn't believe it. Not anything.
I think I saw they will show Bernard tonight or something. Yeah.
Oh, they will?
Yeah.
Oh, good. That's helpful. That's hopeful.
It is made Mary
probably one of the lower channels.
Lower channels?
It was probably, my wife and I saw it.
Oh, you did? Oh, good. Okay, well, that makes me happy because I was searching in vain.
But the primary channels did not.
No,
Right.
No?
There's a conspiracy
Well,
to eradicate Christianity from our country.
Yeah. Yeah, it used to be prevalent.
There are
Anyway.
millions of people out there trying to discredit everything that's in the Bible.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
People in our government doing the same thing.
Yes, and that's why we stand strong, and we do it by focusing on what we have to do here and knowing any era, anywhere can only destroy itself. We don't have to know where, who, how, or when. And
it's not personal.
And it's never personal. It's
Yeah,
not personal.
Paul says in his heart there is no God. So.
Yes, that's right. A fool. All right, Jeremy, read the golden text.
Isaiah. Since the beginning of the world, men have not heard, nor perceived by the ear, neither hath eye seen, O God, besides thee, what hath prepared for him that waiteth for him.
And here we are, we have the New Jerusalem prepared for us.
Not going to see it with our eyes or hear it with our ears. I was reading in Tomlinson's book, I just recently, one of his chapters on Mrs. Eddy's attitude towards home, where she said home should be a beautiful place. But she went even farther, and he quoted her telling someone in her household, and I'm quoting, "Home is not a place, but a power. We find home when we arrive at the full understanding of God." Mary Baker Eddy. This is the New Jerusalem, and that is our home. I thought it was beautiful.
Yes, and it's our home now. Our home now, and anyone, anywhere can have it, even if they're living in a hovel with this knowledge, with this knowing, this truth, and expressing his qualities, you can have it wherever you are, right here and right now. Lord knows we know a lot of people living in mansions who are most unhappy. So this isn't about that. It's about your consciousness. And as your consciousness rises, your seeming material conditions will improve and get better and more beautiful indeed. You want to share with us what you found on this? She here?
No, I don't think she's here.
Oh, all right.
Oh, no, she is here.
Nancy?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear my name. I'm sorry. From Barnes' notes, I found, for since the beginning of the world, the meaning here is that nowhere else among people had there been such blessings imparted, and such happiness enjoyed, or so many proofs of love and protection, as among those who were the people of God and who feared him. Men have not heard. In no nation in all past time have these been heard of, such as thou hast performed, nor perceived by the ear. And Paul refers to this as neither hath entered into the heart of man. Neither hath I seen a God beside thee, which doeth such things for those that trust in him. Neither have our eyes seen a God besides thee, and thy works which thou hast done for those who wait for mercy, one who so richly rewarded those who put their trust in him. What he hath prepared, what he doeth or will do. No God had done what he had. No human being had ever witnessed such manifestations from any other God. For him that waiteth on him, and Paul refers to this as for them that love him. For him who waits, that is, who feels his helplessness and relies on him to interpose and save him. The sense of the whole verse is that God, in his past dealings, had given manifestations of his existence, his power and goodness to those who were his friends, which had been furnished nowhere else. And that was from Barnes' notes.
Thank you. Well, it explains, all these wonderful things in the Bible, and what certainly we all have experienced when we have found our oneness with the Father. Wonderful things happen. People wonder how it can happen. Well, that's how it can happen, through your relationship with God. Because you have set your love upon me, I will deliver you. I will lift you on high because you have known my name. You will call upon me and I will answer you. I will be with you in trouble. I will deliver you and honor you, and with a long life satisfy you. 91st Psalm. That's what God does. And the more we love him and obey him, the more we will feel it, experience in our lives. That's all it is about. It is never about anything else, as that watching point brings in. Focus on him. And let us all work to be experiencing this new Jerusalem, whatever way we can. And we can. It's a promise. Okay, Chardell.
Well, this is all getting to the present, and we have it in the present. This is why. And it's from 1 John. Hereby know we that we dwell in him, and he in us, because he hath given us of his Spirit. He gives us the Jerusalem. It's available when we do the work. And I kind of like that amplified. By this we come to know, we perceive it, we recognize it, we understand it, that we are and are abiding, and we live and remain in him and he in us, because he has given us, imparted to us of his Holy Spirit. It was fun reading the different things, and I'll read a few. We abide with God. He's given us his Spirit as proof. Live in him. It's a permanent gift. It's not a gift wrapped in cellophane. It's a gift very deep, as Mr. Gary has taught us. And it's imparted to us by his Holy Spirit. In him we are dwelling. Amen.
It's beautiful. Yeah, to think on those things. And I love, and especially this time of year, but all the time, in Romans 8:11. But if the spirit of him that raised up Jesus from the dead dwell in you, he that raised up Christ from the dead shall also quicken your mortal bodies by his spirit that dwelleth in you. That very spirit Chardell was talking about, reading about, that if that does dwell in you, it's the same spirit that raised Jesus from the dead after being crucified and being in the tomb for 3 days. It's that same spirit. You've got it. So what is your problem? What is your problem?
And too much on materials
Doing the work.
than spiritual.
Yes.
It didn't, yeah.
Well, make sure whatever it is, you take it to this spirit and know the spirit is in you, and nothing is impossible to this God. Nothing. Nothing. So think on these things. Now, normally the Easter lesson has the Easter story in it. It did not this week, but it's still a beautiful lesson. And we're very grateful for Thomas to give us the beautiful Bible study yesterday on Easter, which was beautiful. If you didn't hear it, you should listen to the recording. We're going to end this little discussion a little early today because Gary's going to read, and I mentioned it to you yesterday. These are archaeological writings of the Sanhedrin and the Talmuds, which is a compilation of ancient Jewish teachings. They were translated by a Dr. McIntosh and a Dr. Timon in 1913 in Italy. I guess they got them from the Vatican. But they are official documents made in 3 courts during the time of Christ Jesus. This is what, and I think it was Wendy that sent this to me. But anyway, now I will say that they say, no, this never happened. So please don't write me and tell me it's not. it's fake news. Like we talked about yesterday. This rings true to me in many ways. And
well, this is Pilate's report to Julius Caesar about the crucifixion and the resurrection, because Pilate was under a lot of criticism by Herod and the chief priests of the Jews. So he felt like he had to explain what he saw happen, and this is his view of what happened. And he was sent to Jerusalem, as you know, during Jesus' ministry there. So he saw it. He was there for a lot of this firsthand. First thing he noticed when he got there was the animosity towards him and Rome by the high priests of the Jewish temple. And he writes, I was convinced that the conquered had declared themselves the enemy of the conquerors. And I would warn the Romans to beware of the high priests of this country. They would betray their own mother to gain office and a luxurious living. It seems to me that of conquered cities, Jerusalem is the most difficult to govern. So turbulent are the people that I live in momentary dread of an insurrection.
Understandable.
Yeah.
it is understandable, and it certainly goes along with The Chosen.
Yep. And then further along he writes, among the various rumors that came to my ears, there was one in particular that attracted my attention. A young man, it was said, had appeared in Galilee preaching with a noble unction a new law in the name of the God that had sent him. At first I was apprehensive that his design was to stir up the people against the Romans, but my fears were soon dispelled. Jesus of Nazareth spoke rather as friend of the Romans than of the Jews. And then he sent his servant to listen to Jesus once when Jesus was preaching. And he writes of that experience. One of the rebellious Jews, so numerous in Jerusalem, having asked Jesus if it was lawful to give tribute to Caesar, he replied, "Render unto Caesar the things that belong to Caesar, and unto God the things that are God's." And he further writes, "This man was neither seditious nor rebellious. I extended to him my protection, unknown perhaps to himself. He was at liberty to act, to speak, to assemble and address the people, and to choose disciples unrestrained by any praetorian mandate." This unlimited freedom granted to Jesus provoked the Jews, not the poor, but the rich and powerful. It is true, Jesus was severe on the latter, and this was a political reason, in my opinion, for not restraining the liberty of the Nazarene. "Scribes and Pharisees," he would say to them, "you are a race of vipers. You resemble painted sepulchres. You appear well unto men, but you have death within you." At other times, he would sneer at the alms of the rich and proud, telling them that the mite of the poor was more precious in the sight of God. Complaints were daily made at the Praetorian against the insolence of Jesus. So then he writes, "I wrote to Jesus requesting an interview with him at the Praetorian. When the Nazarene made his appearance, I was walking in my basilic, and my feet seemed fastened with an iron hand to the marble pavement, and I trembled in every limb as does a guilty culprit, though the Nazarene was as calm as innocence himself. Jesus, said I unto him at last, and my tongue faltered, Jesus of Nazareth, for the last 3 years I have granted you ample freedom of speech, nor do I regret it. Your words are those of a sage. I know not whether you have read Socrates or Plato, but this I know. There is in your discourses a majestic simplicity that elevates you far above those philosophers. The emperor is informed of it, and I, his humble representative in this country, am glad to have allowed you that liberty of which you are so worthy. However, I must not conceal from you that your discourses have raised up against you powerful and inveterate enemies. They even accuse me of being indirectly leagued with you for the purpose of depriving the Hebrews of the little civil power which Rome has left them. And then he tries to persuade Jesus to calm down and to dial down his criticism. And finally, Jesus says to him, Prince of the earth, replied Jesus, I come not to bring war into the world, but peace, love, and charity. I was born the same day on which Augustus Caesar gave peace to the Roman world. Persecutions proceed not from me. I expect it from others, and will meet it in obedience to the will of my Father, who has shown me the way. Restrain, therefore, your worldly prudence. It is not in your power to arrest the victim at the foot of the tabernacle of expiation. So saying, he disappeared like a bright shadow behind the curtains of the basilic, to my great relief, for I felt a heavy burden on me, of which I could not relieve myself while in his presence. And then he talks about Herod. He said, previously to this, Herod called on me at the Praetorian, and on rising to take leave after some trifling conversation, asked me what was my opinion concerning the Nazarene. I replied that Jesus appeared to me to be one of those great philosophers that great nations sometimes produced, that his doctrines were by no means sacrilegious, and that the intentions of Rome were to leave him to that freedom of speech which was justified by his actions. Herod smiled maliciously, and saluting me with ironical respect, departed. And then he talks about the mob that insisted upon Jesus being killed. He writes, the Pharisees were the avowed enemies of Jesus. They cared not for the government. They bore with bitterness the severe reprimands which the Nazarene for 3 years had been continually giving them wherever he went. Timid and too weak to act by themselves, they had embraced the quarrels of the Herodians and the Sadducees. Besides these 3 parties, I had to contend against the reckless and profligate populace, always ready to join a sedition and to profit by the disorder and confusion that resulted therefrom. Jesus was dragged before the high priest and condemned to death. And then the high priest, Herod, was a coward, and he sent Jesus back to Pilate for this. And Pilate writes, the Nazarene was brought back to me. I proceeded to the halls of justice, followed by my guard, and asked the people in a severe tone what they demanded. The death of the Nazarene, was the reply. For what crime? He has blasphemed. He has prophesied the ruin of the temple. He calls himself the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of the Jews. Roman justice, said I, punishes not such offenses with death. Crucify him, cried the relentless rabble. The vociferations of the infuriated mob shook the palace to its foundations. There was but one who appeared to be calm in the midst of the multitude. It was the Nazarene. After many fruitless attempts to protect him from the fury of this merciless persecutors, I adopted a measure which at the moment appeared to me to be the only one that could save his life. I proposed, as it was their custom to deliver a prisoner on such occasions, to release Jesus and let him go free, that he might be the scapegoat, as they called it. But they said, Jesus must be crucified. I then ordered Jesus to be scourged, hoping this might satisfy them, but it only increased their fury. I then called for a basin and washed my hands in the presence of the clamorous multitude, thus testifying that in my judgment, Jesus of Nazareth had done nothing deserving of death. But in vain, it was his life these wretches thirsted for. And then the deed happened. And then afterwards, later the same day, he writes, near the first hour of the night, I threw my mantle around me and went down into the city towards the gates of Golgotha. The sacrifice was consummated. The crowd was returning home, still agitated, it is true, but gloomy, taciturn, and desperate. What they had witnessed had stricken them with terror and remorse. I also saw my little Roman cohort pass by mournfully, the standard bearer having veiled his eagle in token of grief. And I overheard some of the Jewish soldiers murmuring strange words which I did not understand. I returned to the praetorium, sad and pensive. On ascending the stairs, the steps of which were still stained with the blood of the Nazarene, I perceived an old man in a suppliant posture, and behind him several Romans in tears. He threw himself at my feet and wept most bitterly. It is painful to see an old man weep, and my heart, being already overcharged with grief, we, though strangers, wept together. Father, said I to him, after gaining control of my feelings, who are you, and what is your request? I am Joseph of Arimathea, replied he, and am come to beg of you upon my knees the permission to bury Jesus of Nazareth. Your prayer is granted, said I to him, and at the same time I ordered Manlius to take some soldiers with him to superintend the interment, lest it should be profaned. A few days after, the sepulchre was found empty, His disciples proclaimed all over the country that Jesus had risen from the dead, as he had foretold. This created more excitement even than the crucifixion. As to its truth, I cannot say for certain, but I have made some investigation of the matter, so you can examine for yourself and see if I am in fault, as Herod represents. And it goes on, and he talks about the interviews. He interviewed a lot of people to try to find out what exactly happened to Jesus after the crucifixion. And then he writes, he concludes, "It seems to me that if the Jewish theory be true, these conclusions are correct, for they are in accord with this man's life, as is known and testified by both friends and foes. For the elements were no more in his hands than the clay in the hands of the potter. He could convert water into wine. He could change death into life, disease into health. He could calm the seas, still the storms, call up fish with a silver coin in its mouth. Now, I say, if he could do all these things, which he did, and many more, as the Jews all testify, and it was doing these things that created this enmity against him, he was not charged with criminal offenses, nor was he charged with violating any law, nor of wrongdoing any individual in person. And all these facts are known to thousands, as well by his foes as by his friends. I am almost ready to say, as did Manulus at the cross, truly, this was the Son of God." Pontius Pilate.
Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.